So this was something that you had sent to me. The United Mine Workers of America, which is, of course, the miners' union, famously based out of West Virginia, they recently came out and said that they would endorse Biden's green energy plan so long as he met a couple different provisions about guaranteeing that the jobs, the solar and green jobs that would be replacing the coal jobs would be good jobs. So Paul, tell us a little bit about what happened there, and whether you think that this marks, a step in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, I think it could be an interesting turning point. I mean, I think the key here is that can they deliver on the jobs that would be replaced? And I think like part of the Biden plan is like, providing, money for the transition for workers at their current salary. And I think that's one step. But I think the second step has to be the jobs that are replacing are on par, with those jobs. And Cal, I don't know if you can throw up the quote here from the article. But, so as the same, coal is still significant to the economy in coal-producing states like West Virginia and pays on average $75,000 a year, well above the median income. And this is the UMW president, Cecil Roberts, saying, I have no doubt that President Biden wants to create good-paying union jobs, but currently the jobs that are being discussed here are not good-paying union jobs. They're a fraction of what a coal miner makes. And so I think this is the key here. Like these jobs that we're replacing have to be of a similar wage scale. And I think anyone can relate to this. I mean, if you are making $75,000 a year or whatever in a union job, like it's very hard to go back from that. I mean, imagine going from that to $15 an hour, or even $20 an hour, And I think that's the challenge here. And so what I worry about is if this is not implemented right, it would really sour workers on this. And I think some of the other quotes in the articles kind of get into, at the end of the day, the workers are saying like, look, I mean, if I'm in a desperate position, I'm going to take whatever job comes. And I think more and more workers and some of these unions are seeing the writing on the wall. So it's encouraging that they're taking this step. And I think it's encouraging that the administration is talking about a real transition. But I think the key component is what are those new jobs? And I think this is why it's ideal for this to come about through organizing. I mean, we had Lara Skinner on recently. If there were a coalition from the beginning demanding that these new jobs have like project labor agreements or of a certain wage scale, that would be better. I mean, in a situation like this, it doesn't necessarily look like that's being organized, and it's kind of relied on if Biden is going to force that issue, which I'm not sure he will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just want to add on to that. As you mentioned, we had Lara Skinner on a couple episodes ago to kind of talk about some of these issues and how unions can be sort of front and center of the transition to green energy. And something that came up a lot on that episode is the standard left line that there doesn't have, it's a false dichotomy, jobs versus the climate, right? Like we don't have to choose between those two. That's always what people on the left say. That's what, progressives and liberals say as well. And I think that's true, or I would like that to be true. But in so many instances, I do think that we, as a broad left or like as progressives, really, really need to make the case for jobs. We can't just wish we can't just like wish a green economy that has good jobs into being. And, recently this came up, the one of the co-founders of the Sunrise Movement, he tweeted some recent Bureau of Labor Statistics data that basically says, as of 2020, the average wage of someone working in solar power generation is now slightly higher than someone working in oil or gas extraction. And then he writes, green jobs are good jobs. It's time for good jobs for all. And to the Sunrise Movement's credit, part of what they've been doing recently is campaigning for the PRO Act. They've been very vocal about their support for that. I think that they are genuinely committed to what we call a just transition. Now, that said, I also want to point out that Jacobin contributor Fred Stafford, who's written about climate and energy for Jacobin, he then looked at the Bureau of Labor Statistics data and found that the reason why The reason why it looks like solar and wind jobs are on average higher paid than fossil fuel jobs is because there's more management in those fields, so that drives up the average. He also pointed out that there are more like legal professionals in that in those sectors, which also drives up the average. But if you look at just the construction jobs, they're still paying less than fossil fuels, and so that's I think something that is just really important to point out, because again, you can sort of look at the broad picture and say, oh, well, like it looks like green jobs are good jobs, but like, are they the green jobs that these displaced coal miners are going to be working in? Probably not.
Yeah, and I think like this situation in West Virginia, I mean, it shows the hope and the promise that I think if there is a concrete plan, like I think more and more workers will go for this and believe it. But I think it really speaks to, and I think this is also important for leftist candidates who are running for office or in office. I think like need to do the work, and I'm really on my Elizabeth Warren today, but they need to have a plan, and I think it really has to be a fleshed out plan. I think it's definitely good to say like, yes, we're going to take care of workers, blah blah blah, but that has to be backed up with something very specific that I think makes sense. And again, in the ideal sense, is something developed with the workers affected. One of my frustrations, honestly, with Bernie during the campaign and in the debates was, he actually on his website had a great just transition plan where he laid out, we're going to pay workers at their current salary for 5 years, all this stuff, but he would never say it in a debate. He kind of just said vaguely, and it would only take like 2 seconds to like lay out some of the specifics. And I think that's the crucial part. Like there really does have to be thinking of how would this actually work, and present it in a good way. But again, I think I'm hopeful that this is a good first step. Damn,
I was gonna say, Paul, you're a changed man. Quoting Elizabeth Warren multiple times, ragging on Bernie.
Wow. I'm going to do a whole thing where I'm like, oh, I'm just having a beer. But
point taken. Yeah.
Right. I mean, I'm hopeful that maybe this is a good first step. And again, I think like, a lot of these workers and unions are not stupid. Like they understand that climate change is real. They understand where things are going. So I think that there's an opportunity to say, we're on your side, and here is a viable plan to make this work. So I hope the jobs that come in West Virginia are kind of on par with what they had before.
I want to mention that another interesting thing that kind of came out of this event, where the UMWA sort of announced their proposal and announced their support for Biden's energy plan, is Joe Manchin. This was the same event at which Joe Manchin came out and declared that he would co-sponsor the PRO Act. And I had heard about Manchin kind of coming out in support of the PRO Act like earlier this week. And I think a lot of news outlets were actually a little like, maybe accidentally, maybe on purpose, I'm not sure, but like we're a little coy about the fact that he announced this with the mine workers at their event. Like I read a couple different reports where it was just like, Joe Manchin announces at a press conference that he now supports the PRO Act, right?
That's how I first saw it, actually. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I don't know if the mine workers like single-handedly, told him to support the PRO Act, and he was like, I only take marching orders from you guys. I definitely will. But I will say that, again, it was their event, and support for the PRO Act is in their proposal, the one that they took to Biden. So that, they include that as part of the transition that they would like to see. And so I think that's interesting. And I also just have a hunch that Joe Manchin is more responsive to the UMWA in West Virginia, as much as I would like to think that, tons of calls from New York and Philly DSA flipped him. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I don't know. I wouldn't necessarily assume that it wasn't the calls as part of it. But I ultimately don't know what did it. I mean, or maybe just a combination of both. But yeah, I mean that's encouraging.
Just a quick question. Do you think that there's hope for like Kristen Sinema or like any of that other wing getting on board?
I mean, here's the thing. I mean, I didn't even really think there was hope for Joe Manchin.
I know. That's why I ask.
So yeah, I think I think it all comes down to, like if these politicians are tied enough to labor where they need labor and they understand that they need labor, and in their areas they're fired up enough to be pushing for it. I think it's always possible. And again, I mean, I gotta give a shout out. DSA's made something like over 100,000 calls, and I can't think that doesn't make any sort of difference. That kind of pressure, and I think now that the focus is going to be zeroing in on those two.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know. I mean, I've been pleasantly surprised a lot lately, so I wouldn't count it out. I think it's going to be like an uphill fight, though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.